Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video I'm back talking about Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels. I'm going to be doing my mid-season power ranking. We're at the halfway point in the season. I'll be ranking every player left in the game based on how likely I think they are to win the game. And beyond that, I'll also talk about the players booed so far and also my general opinions on the season. So let's get that started. During my thoughts on the season so far, it's been very good. Like, Titans vs. Rebels is surprisingly a really great season where, up to this last week, I've been very impressed with the changes that Australian Survivor has made in the last few seasons, where we do know that Heroes vs. Villains did have a new showrunner, and you could very much tell in these last two seasons that there have been less twists involved, and they've been just letting the players play, obviously taking episode 10 out of it, but mixing down the fact that we have these really big tribes that allow for more interesting dynamics. Like, Titans vs. Rebels here has been very refreshing. Obviously coming from the new era of Survivor in the US, which has become very stale through this very opposite approach to Australian Survivor. I do think we're at the point where I might have to finally say I do think Australian Survivor is just the better current product. Despite the fact that, again, there are still things I don't like about Australian Survivor. I don't like its very over-the-top editing style. I don't like how hyper-focused it is on specific members of the cast. I don't like the fact that there are still non-eliminations. But just through and through, this has been a really solid season of the show where it just feels like most people on this cast are playing the game pretty hard. And again, to me, that was a bit of a shock, considering coming into it, I actually was not expecting much from it. I didn't feel like there was much hype for this season. I do remember even in the preseason, there was this article about how production did not particularly like this season and that the crew had a tough time during the season, which again, I thought would bleed into the show and the fact that it would just be a bad season. But no, it's actually been a really strong one. I think up there are some of the best Australian Survivor seasons up to this point. Feeling like this big shift for Australian Survivor as well, and it kind of going against a lot of what Australian Survivor had been previously built on. This fact that there have been a lot of focus on physical strength and you keep the strong around, only for the first 2 weeks to have this strong group be in the minority and being taken out one by one. And then post swap, it was a very interesting dynamic with these really great rivalries and like the Ferris Kirby dynamic, the Mark Caroline dynamic. And again, there's a lot to like on this season. So up to this point, it's always been very great, and hopefully ends up sticking the landing as we move forward. But with that, now let's talk about the players booted so far, giving my brief thoughts on them. Starting off with Frankie, who again was my number 2 pick coming into the season, and really funny to see her be booted right away. Now, straight up, I did not realize how much of a physical specimen she was. I just did not realize how overtly physical she was, to the point where if I had known that, I would not have been as high on her. I probably would have looked at her more like a Lydia type of someone that gets booted around the merge. But again, the fact that she was the first boot is still pretty insane. Again, I thought she was entertaining on the show, was a decent villain for the first episode. But again, definitely surprised me how early she was booted. We didn't get Jessica, who again was about right. I think her being booted second was pretty much what I was predicting. She definitely felt like someone that would be booted very early, and someone that didn't particularly come off as a particularly good player either. Someone that seemed to only just stay through the first round just because the actual majority wanted to use her as a number to take out Frankie, and considering the fact that she was just expendable right after that, again, not particularly good sign of her as a player, but someone that again also brought some entertainment to the show. Next up, we then have PETA, who was my winner pick, so that wasn't great. I believe a new low for earliest boot for an Australian Survivor winner pick for me. Also, just in general, gameplay-wise, might be my worst winner pick ever. Maybe debate this with like Aubrey from Edge of Extinction, but still, PETA plays this really bad, and to see her go so early was definitely a major shock to me. I really did not expect her to go home early, even at the time of the first 2 episodes. While I did feel like there were signs that she was in the minority, I not expected to really turn on her that quickly. But again, she brought a lot in her boot episode. She definitely was a big character there. And again, she found an idol. She threw the challenge, got voted out with the idol. Again, there was a lot going on there. So at least she brought entertainment to the show, even though, again, her run on the season was not particularly good. Next up, moving on to Tobias. And Tobias just kind of sucks. He seems like a terrible player. Someone that straight up, is going to be higher than he should be on my eventual player ranking, simply due to the fact that he went out kind of by accident and through Kelly just being Kelly. But Tobias, again, brought nothing to the show, seemed to be a terrible player. I mean, he's making like L signs to the Titans and just kind of seems like a dick based on what we've seen. But again, a perfect person to lose this early on in the season, as again, who cares about Tobias? Next up, moving on to Nathan. And again, Nathan being a boot this early is also mind-blowing to me. I mean, the fact that Nathan, this like massive physical specimen, again, alongside Jaden, probably the strongest person on the Titans tribe, for him to be booted before the swap is, again, kind of insane. Though obviously he came off as a terrible player, and one that was on the bottom the entire time, one that only seemed to survive as long as he did simply because of physical strength, and even then he was like the split vote and the second vote. Again, like there's not much to really praise there, but again, he was a fun character. I mean, the fact that he was this really cocky presence, despite the fact he had really nothing going for him in the game, was all really humorous to see, and he did have some funny confessionals, and he definitely was a fun character on the show. Next up, moving on to Viola, and again, also mind-blowing we lost Viola this early, where Viola is someone that I very much pegged for making a deep run. I mean, just how much setup there was to her relationship with Valeria and showing them working alongside Mark, it very much screamed out as that being a long-term alliance, but again, it wasn't, and it gets cut short the swap, which was just, again, completely mind-blowing to me. I think it's a shame considering Viola didn't get that much content on the show either. I mean, what she did get was fun, and she has a great opening confessional. She had some fun moments during the challenges, like she was playing the game hard, so again, it's definitely a shame to lose her this early, but to be fair, I do think gameplay-wise she probably made her bed, though. Now openly she was targeting Caroline, but someone that I was definitely disappointed to see go home this early. Next up, we're moving on to Sarah, and Sarah is just fine. I mean, she was kind of what I expected of her coming into the season. Of this kind of passive player that's probably going to stick around for a little bit due to physical strength, though obviously she gets swapped into a pretty bad position. And to be fair, wasn't in a great position even on her original tribe, but obviously gets taken out in a really insane tribal. I mean, that was one of the best episodes of Australian Survivor possibly ever, and just how hectic everything was there. And she obviously gets taken out in a fluky way, but really I feel like she was kind of the perfect person to go there. I mean, not really that entertaining on the show, and that doesn't really have that much game prospects down the road either. So again, a great casualty for a pretty big blindside there. But then we move on to Garrick, who I love Garrick. I was so disappointed to lose Garrick so early. I mean, Garrick is probably one of my favorite characters on this season. And the fact that he talks about being in loss prevention and how he catches rats and he actually turns out to be kind of good was a surprise to me. And the fact that he had like very accurate reads in the game was very impressive to see. It makes me now the fact that he was this big straight man, and the fact that he was this person that we always see his reactions to Kelly and him being annoyed at her. Again, like all that was just really, really funny. And again, I think Garrick actually was a pretty good player. I mean, I don't really fault him too much for the way he goes out. I mean, obviously there are fundamental things to criticize from him, but I do think he plays his boot round almost as well as he possibly could have. So again, just in general, I was very impressed with Garrick on this season. I very much was expecting him to be a bit of a dodo that would think that he would have good reads, but then not, and then be booted relatively early. And while he is still booted somewhat early, he had a much better run on this season than I ever expected him to. Next up, moving on to Charles, who is probably one of the most screwed over players in Survivor history. I mean, the twist that he gets taken out on is one where he was so secure coming into that tribal, and for at the last second, there'd be this twist where minority now gains the majority and can vote him out. Now, straight up, I do think from a storytelling perspective, I did think it made for great TV, especially considering how cocky he was at tribal. But like from a gameplay perspective, I do think this is definitely one of the bigger instances of someone getting screwed over on Australian Survivor, and up there with the likes of Phil and Baden and Brains versus Braun, with the twist that takes him out kind of feeling like a mix of the two, and it being this last second shakeup and only 3 people getting to vote, which is complete BS. But really outside that, I mean, we didn't get much of Charles on the show, and again, like I do think it was a satisfying moment to see him go out in that way, even though again it sets a terrible precedent gameplay wise. Finally, the final pre-juror is Kelly, and Kelly obviously was incredible TV, obviously a massive personality and a very chaotic player, and one that is potentially one of the worst players Australian Survivor has ever seen. To where, while I'm still unsure on where exactly I'm going to land on my player ranking, I do feel like she is someone that I would have no faith in on any given season, and could have just been this easy goat to drag along, but she was playing too chaotically to even be that. She's someone that couldn't even be relied on to vote out Tobias or even stick to her group post swap. And it's like, Kelly is just an astronomically bad player, but one that, again, made for great TV. So at least there is that. But with that, we are now at the top 14. We have 14 players still in the game coming into the merge, which is obviously a new record here. And again, I was pretty surprised when I saw this. I really did not think that they were going to merge at 14, though, I mean, straight up, I'm not opposed to it. I do feel like on something like Australian Survivor, which has a bigger cast to begin with, I do think them merging with slightly larger numbers than normal isn't something I'm too bothered with. And again, it leaves there to be so many options coming into this merge with so many shifting dynamics with, again, these built-in rivalries and a lot of people that have not been on the same tribe together, where, again, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But again, I will be ranking the 14 players left in the game based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. Starting it off at number 14, the person who I think is the least likely to win the game at this point is Kitty. Mainly because, who is Kitty? Well, obviously Kitty is the least developed character on the show. She has barely been on the show. She's only gotten confessionals in one episode, and that one episode was an episode that she was shown negatively, with her being wrong about Mark potentially flipping on her. And really, there's not much positive to go with from Kitty's edit, though I will say Kitty does seem to be a competent player. I mean, while obviously, yeah, she was tricked by Mark, she is someone that does seem to be very good socially, where all we're seeing is her having these really close one-on-one bonds with most of the people that she's playing with, and being a major reason why people are sticking with her group. And again, I do think Kitty is definitely an underestimated player based on the edit, but again, simply her edit is simply just non-existent, to where there's no way she is winning this season, especially on a show like Australian Survivor, which really likes to hype up their winner. I think it would be very bizarre if Kitty were to win this season. So for me, she's here at number 14. Next up, number 13, moving on to a player that hasn't gotten that many confessionals, though is actually not that invisible on the show, but still someone I don't think is likely to win. That person is Jaden. And I mean, with that, I guess I might as well mention the fact that the confessional count for this season is obviously, like most seasons, a bit unbalanced. I mean, about half the cast has 30 or more confessionals on this season, with the likes of Ferris, Mark, and Kirby being well beyond everyone else, while we still have like half the cast with less than 15 confessionals. Though again, despite that, and Jaden being one of those people, like, I do feel like we know Jaden pretty well. I feel like we've gotten to see a lot of him, and again, I think that comes down to the Australian Survivor editing style, where confessionals aren't everything. I mean, it's more so about general screen time than it is about confessional count, as again, that's just the way they like to tell their story. And again, through that, like, again, I do feel like we got to know Jaden pretty well up to this point. However, Jaden is still not winning this season. I mean, the thing is, like, Jaden has been shown as aloof in the game. He doesn't really know what's going on, and while he has come off as pretty likable and this massive ham for the show, he is simply someone that doesn't really seem to have much game going on. And he's someone that, if he were to get to the end, I don't even know if he would have the respect to win the jury vote from a season like this, a season that seems to be filled with people that are playing the game very hard. So while I do think he has very good relationships in the game, again, I don't think much of that translates to game respect. So while I think he's definitely someone that the show's trying to make you like as this kind of aloof goofball, he's just not someone that they're propping up as someone that's going to win this season. And because of that, for me, he's here number 13. Now number 12, we're moving on to a player that I just find this person's edit very bizarre, in the fact that it seemed like they were propped up to be a massive character early on, only for them to be somewhat silent through most of the season, and that person is Raymond. And again, Raymond got a big premiere. It did seem like he was going to be this big character early on. He got an intro right away, yet despite that, he just isn't really shown that much. And again, like, while his confessional count is extremely low, he is still shown on the show at points, again, being close to Ferris and having been close to Kelly and having fun dynamics there. But we're just not getting any of his point of view. I mean, it's very clear that his alliance members are much more important to the story than him, which, I mean, to be fair, I mean, someone like Liz last season had that style of edit early on, and the fact that obviously George and Shawnee were much more prominent characters, and through that she was underrated. But I mean, it still felt like she was still being shown positively when she was shown, and her relations were being hyper-focused on the show, where that's simply not the case with Raymond. Raymond just kind of seems to be there. I mean, he doesn't really seem to be doing that much in the game. And again, even when he is shown, he's shown as a bit of a doofus, getting this content of him kind of like awkwardly stumbling around looking for an idol. And even when he does get a confessional, it's not really showing him in a strategic light. It's showing him bash on Eileen for like no reason. And again, like, there's not really much to like from Raymond's edit, to the point where Raymond very much screams out to me as a potential runner-up. I do feel like he kind of screams screams out as kind of Baden-y from obviously Champs Contenders 2, of someone that could get to the end and have just no respect from the jury, being looked at as, again, Raymond is someone that I don't look at particularly highly. Though, again, at least he's on the show and at least got an intro package, so at least that's something. So because of that, for me, he's here at number 12. Now, number 11, we're moving on to a string of players here. Really, the next 4 on the board are players that seem to only be shown when absolutely necessary. And through that, again, doesn't scream out that they're going to win this season, but are players that at least have more to their edit than the last few you talked about. But again, this person is someone that has been extremely under-edited, and that person is Scott. And Scott, kind of like Kitty, seems to be a pretty good player. I mean, he seems to be someone that is playing the middle pretty well. He seems to be someone that has the most connections to the opposing side from the Kirby side of things, to where he's the one to go to Ferris and try to convince Ferris to play his idol. And like, it feels like Scott is playing this pretty decent middle game, but we're not seeing a lot of that on the show. Now, again, in comparison to Raymond, we have seen more of Scott. Now, the issue is the fact that, again, he didn't get introduced until way later in the season. I mean, he was completely invisible for the first week of the show, which is a pretty damning sign in my eyes. But I think, again, unlike Raymond, when he is shown positively. It feels like he's being shown as this pretty savvy player, and one that I would not be shocked if he does actually play well moving forward. But again, it just does not scream out as winner. It just feels like Australian Survivor would really hype up the winner a lot more, especially because, again, he does seem like a good player. Again, like, if he was a bad player and they were hiding that, then like that would at least make more sense. But he does seem like a good player, and they're just not showing that as much. So where, again, it feels like he's only being shown when he is playing this role as this mediator between Kirby and Ferris, and like straight up in comparison to the rest of this like tier of players that are only being shown when necessary, I actually feel like Sky is the person that's probably being shown most outside of when he's necessary, but it's just simply not enough. And he definitely feels like the most under-edited of this grouping of people, to where I just do not feel like that is the way they would portray their winner. So because of that, for me, he's here at number 11. At number 10, we're moving on to probably the definitive player on this season of only being shown when absolutely necessary, and that person is Winna. And Winna, I actually do find to be pretty entertaining on the show. I kind of like him kind of having this like mellow personality that feels very opposed to a lot of the people he's working with. But again, from a pure editing standpoint, again, he's only being shown when necessary. Again, he was invisible in the premiere, only be a major character in episode 2 simply because he found an idol in that episode. Despite the fact that he seemed to be pretty well integrated on his original Titan tribe, we don't really see any of that, where and he's part of this like split vote plan to take out Nathan, to split the votes on Jess and Nathan, yet despite that, we don't get any of his perspective there, even though we're shown him to be supposedly close to Nathan. He goes invisible once again, only to get more prominence in the post swap because he's in this like swing position. Even then, he doesn't get the most confessionals of his group. Again, he becomes more prominent in episode 10 because he has an idol that he's gonna play in that episode. And again, it just feels like he's simply being shown when absolutely necessary, which not much depth beyond that. Now, again, he still is being shown. I mean, he got his intro in week 1. I mean, that's something better than Scott, at least. So where, like, straight up, I do think I would actually have probably more faith in Scott to actually win the game than Winna. But again, just based on the editing of the season, I do feel like Winna ticks more of the boxes than Scott, even though Winna is definitely not winning either. But because that, again, for me, he's here at number 10. Now, number 9, we're moving on to a player that I really want to do well. I feel like this is a player that seems like a very competent player, but another one that is simply just being shown when necessary, and that person is Eileen. And again, for me, Eileen has demonstrated a lot of skill for the game. Again, the fact that she, alongside Garrick, picked up on the fact that Garrick was getting votes at that tribal and tried to convince Ferris to play the idol on Garrick. The fact that in this last episode, she seemed to be aware of what was going on and that Ferris didn't need to play his idol despite Ferris's paranoia. Like, we're seeing Eileen have pretty good reads on the game. And again, when we're shown Eileen, she is shown as a big player, which is obviously something Australian Survivor likes. Though my issue is, again, it feels like, one, she's being shown only when necessary. It's only in like episode 4 when she's the one leading the charge in the split vote plan. Only in episode 10 where she's on the bottom, and is really scrambling for her life. And same goes with episode 11 as well, where again, it very much feels like Eileen is just simply there when absolutely necessary. It doesn't feel like there's much care being put into her edit outside that. And now again, like in comparison to the likes of Winna and Scott, I do feel like she's at least being propped up as a big player, which is something that Australian Survivor obviously likes. However, I also feel like she's being shown more negatively than them. It feels like we're getting more content about how untrustworthy she is, and we get this content about the Kirby's Alliance not trusting her and wanting her out. So again, like considering that, and also the fact that she was just invisible in the week one, it does not scream out as winnery to me. It does scream out as someone that again is a big player, but is probably going to be taken out probably somewhere in the mid-merge phase of the game. Though again, she does feel like a good player and someone that I would like to do well, but again, it's just simply not enough to actually look at her as a realistic winning prospect. Now, number 8, we're moving on to a player that is really just a minor step above Eileen. I think in many ways, this person's edit is actually kind of worse in the fact that this person isn't being propped up as big of a player. But however, I think there are minor positives to point out this person more than Eileen. That person is Rihanna. And Rihanna is someone that, again, is only being shown when absolutely necessary. I mean, she's someone that's obviously becoming a lot more prominent in the edit recently because of the fact that she's on the bottom and she's one of the only rebels left on the original rebel tribe. And it feels like she's only getting this content simply because she is in a lot of danger at this point. But again, at least she is getting that content, and it is somewhat consistent content. Now, I will say there is definitely a criticism to be had in the fact that she messed up the Sarah vote, and we got no explanation from her following that, no reaction to that, which is definitely a knock there. However, again, we do know where she stands in the game. We do know a lot of her relationships in the game. We know her relationship with Caroline and Kitty. We know her relationship with Kirby and Scott, and we have this good sense of where she is in the game, along with the fact that she now has an idol. And I mean, something that again props her up above Eileen for me is the fact that she at least was in the premiere week. She was actually in the premiere. She actually got the first confessional when going to the Rebels tribe, to where while it wasn't a very deep confessional in any way, at least was something. She was at least there in the first week. That's something at least to where, again, for me, I just think in comparison to Eileen, I feel like Eileen is being, again, shown as a bigger player, but also being shown negatively and also just not being shown at all in week one. For Rihanna is not being shown as negatively, which again, in a way, you could also say that her not being shown after the Sarah vote is edit kind of protecting her in that light. Also, again, she was at least in week one, to where for me, again, it is those minor positives that do leave her here at number 8. Now, number 7, and at number 7, we have a player that is obviously a big character on the show, definitely one of the main fixtures on the show at this point. However, their edit has not always been that consistent, which is a major reason why they're this low on the list for me. And at number 7, I do have Caroline. And Caroline, again, was invisible week 1. She was really just not even on the show outside of these camp life scenes where the likes of Eden and Mark were getting more of the content during that point in the season, to where, again, that is pretty damning to me. The fact they even bothered to introduce her in the premiere week. However, again, after that, she's all over the show. I mean, she is a pretty prominent fixture since then, which again, she is a big player in the season. She is running a lot of the strategy of the game, yet again, it just feels like that's there because she kind of had to be, because she is actually this very important figure in the game. And again, she does have this very strong rivalry with Mark, and this dynamic between the two is really interesting. And she also is having this built up rivalry with Valeria that is probably going to play a factor coming into the merge, to where while Caroline is not someone I grouped in with the people that were only being shown when necessary, in a way, she kind of is, even though her edit is much larger than those previous people. To where, I mean, straight up, just Caroline just does feel like she's set up for a fall. I do not think Caroline is winning this season. Again, not being prominent in week 1 is definitely a red flag there. But even beyond that, it does feel like we're really getting this set up to Valeria and Mark taking out Caroline at some point down the road, to where I don't really get the sense that Caroline is someone that we're supposed to be rooting for in the story. And I would not be shocked if she is a relatively early merge boot based on how out in front she is at this point in the season, to where I don't think Caroline is actually winning. But again, in comparison to the last few you talked about, again, she is a major fixture on the show. Really from this point on, I feel like these are the players that are these more major characters on the show, which I do think the winner is within one of these people, as it typically is with Australian Survivor. But again, I just feel like Caroline's edit is too inconsistent, just definitely feels like set up for a fall, to where don't think she's that likely to win, so because of that, for me, she's here at number 7. At number 6, we're moving on to a player that has had a very turbulent edit for me, where after the premiere, I was extremely high on this person, and that just sank towards the end of the pre-swap, though it once again rebounded pretty recently until it went down a little bit again, to where, again, it's just kind of all over the place, and that person is Alex. And again, Alex's edit has just gone all over. I mean, like, in the premiere, he actually gets pretty strong content. I mean, he is a person that gets to detail the dynamics of his original tribe, getting to talk about his observations of the tribe, something that was a dead giveaway from the likes of Haley and Mark, that they were going to win their seasons from the premiere, where again, Alex got that style of content in the premiere of this episode, only for his edit to just kind of sink afterwards, being shown as a bumbling idiot and this person who gets locked out in the game and is just out of the loop, only for him to, again, rebound a bit. It did seem like he was on this upward trajectory to where even after his swap, I feel like his edit actually got kind of better for a point, to where there was a point where I did have him number 3 in my top contenders list, though I do feel like these last few episodes have not been great. I mean, obviously in this last episode, he did his Find Idol, though again, they had to accompany that with him being a dodo and finding it, and Ferris constantly trying to lead him to the idol and him not being able to see it despite it being right in front of him. Even beyond that, I feel like the edit has kind of shown him as, again, being a bit of an idiot at points, which, again, might be unavoidable, but it's still not the way that I think Australian Survivor want to portray their winner. Mixing out the fact that, again, we still have not gotten an intro package from him, to where, again, I think all these, like, red flags are starting to really pile up at this point, to where, again, he is still one of the more likely winners on the board. He is still a pretty major character on this season, and he's someone that I do think the show is trying to make you root for as his underdog at this point in the season, but I just feel like the edit isn't really backing him up for the long term, to where I don't think he's going to end up winning this season, but he's definitely someone that could at this point, which is better than most of the rest of the cast. So because that for me, he's here number 6. Now number 5, we're moving on to another very turbulent edit, one that after the premiere, I thought this was the number 1 contender, but then since then, his edit's just been going up and down constantly, to where at this point I landed at number 5, and that person is Eden. And again, like Alex, Eden got an incredible premiere. I mean, again, Eden got that same confessional on the Titans tribe of being able to talk about the dynamics of his tribe and his observations, which again is a very, very strong confessional. His entire week 1 is mostly strong. Now, I will say episode 2 was definitely a bit rocky with him being shown as paranoid, but again, it was a pretty decent premiere week, only for him to then become kind of invisible in week 2, which again is not a death sentence. I mean, we saw Haley have that very similar style of edit, a very prominent week 1, invisible week 2, only to then skyrocket again in week 3. And again, that was kind of my assumption of where Eden's edit was going coming into week 3, and he did get a strong episode 7 at first, seeming like this major player on the new swap tribe and orchestrating the vote, until we then get content about how paranoid he is once again, which seemed to demerit him once again. And since then, he's just been not as prominent on the show, which again just makes his edit just very strange, where he had an incredible premiere week outside of, again, him being shown as paranoid, but then since then has only been shown when absolutely necessary, and it makes me very conflicted on what to think of his edit. Now, again, I do think Eden can win this season. I think Eden is someone that is still in the running, especially if he has this major uptick after the merge, but I do think his inconsistency here is something that is obviously this massive red flag, especially considering like how much you can tell that Eden was this big character on the island. You can tell that his rapport, JLP, just how much producers seem to like him while filming, so it's a bit strange that he's just not as prominent on the show in these more recent episodes. But again, I do think Eden is someone that, again, can still win the game. I do think he's shown himself to be an actual very impressive player, or despite the show showing him as paranoid, I think he's actually made the right call strategically during those points, which again is probably a demerit against his edit as well. The fact that by him making the right move, they're not showing it as that. But again, I do think he is someone that can still win, but is not the most likely winner on the board, which is why he's here number 5. Now number 4, and at number 4 we have a person who obviously has a massive edit on this season, someone that is this major character and player here, though I do think at the end of the day is probably set up for a fall pretty soon. But if they don't go home soon, they're probably a likely winner, and that person is Kirby. And again, Kirby is someone that if she makes it through the first 2 weeks of the merge, I'll be pretty mind blown. I think she is someone that is very much set up for a fall very soon. I think the content of Kelly telling Kitty to watch out for Kirby feels like set up to Kirby being taken out early merge, but Kirby's edit for most part is pretty strong. Now there is the red flag of the fact that she was pretty much invisible for the first 2 episodes. However, by the end of week 1, she still did get her massive episode in episode 3, which I think the way the Australian Survivor likes to edit is by looking at it week by week instead of episode by episode. But still, I do feel like Kirby not being in the premiere is definitely a big detriment there. However, beyond that, again, I do think Kirby's edit has been strong, considering the fact that I actually disagree with almost every decision she has made strategically in this game. I do think Kirby has very much demonstrated how impressive she is socially. The fact that she's able to pull Valeria and Winna to her side, the fact that she had this very loyal group around her. However, she's also just so bad strategically, and the fact that she is just so aggressive strategically to her detriment, to the point where it cost her allies in the game, to where it did seem like Ferris and Garrick were extremely loyal to her to begin with, just for her to openly try to play both sides for no reason and target Ferris following that for no reason. We have her voting out Kelly, which is ridiculous to me. Where, yes, I understand that Kelly is someone that you can't really trust moving forward, but she's still a lesser threat than the likes of Ferris and Eileen and these other bigger players in the game. So there's at least more potential that you can pull Kelly back to your side than those players. And really, all you're doing by potentially voting for Kelly is just opening up the situation where the other side could pin the votes against you and take you out, which, again, mind blown they didn't. But still, again, I don't think Kirby has played the game well strategically, but she is a very good social player. But it feels like the show is backing her up, though. It feels like every single time we see the strategic move from Kirby, the show is showing it as a good move, despite the fact that it's not, which is something that, again, definitely propels Kirby in the edit for me. The fact that, again, we are being shown her as this very good player. But again, I don't think it's going to last. I do think we are getting this overconfidence from Kirby that feels like set up for her fall. And again, considering the fact that we got that conversation between Kelly and Kitty, and I do still feel like Ferris is primed to win the battle between the two. I do feel like Kirby is set up to ultimately go pretty soon, but if she doesn't, again, she is a pretty likely winner. So again, Kirby is still a possible winner, but someone I just don't think is actually going to get there. Now, number 3, we're moving on to a player that, again, is one step above Kirby, to where I think this person has a bit more mixed of an edit, but I do think this person is definitely propped to be one of the main characters of this season. That person is Ferris. And again, Ferris is someone that we got set up right from the premiere. He is someone that instantly got talked about as the next coming of George, and has since then been a major player in this season. So obviously, a major focus of the season is this rivalry between him and Kirby. And again, I do very much get the sense that Ferris is going to end up winning that battle, where I feel like we're being shown a lot more humanization of Ferris. We're being shown him as a more complex character than Kirby, where, again, with Kirby, we're getting this more overconfident version of her, where with Ferris we're seeing him more so as paranoid. And while, again, it's still not an overly good look, I do feel like Ferris is still primed to win that battle, even though I don't think he's going to win the war. And straight up, I do think Ferris is probably too big of a character to win this season, where outside of David and All Stars, the winner of Australian Survivor is very rarely the main character of the season, the person who has the most confessionals on the season. It's usually someone that is a step below that. Again, looking at Blood vs. Water with Mark, I mean, in that season, Sam and Jordy were bigger characters than he was. In Brains vs. Brawn, obviously George was a bigger character than Haley. Pia was obviously not as big of a character as Luke and Harry. Again, in these more stereotypical Australian Survivor winner edits, the winner is typically not the person that has the most confessionals and is the most prominent on the show, but is a step below that. And I feel like Ferris is too big of a character right now to actually be the winner, but I think he is still set up for longevity. I would be surprised if Ferris goes early merge. Again, I think he is going to win the battle against Kirby. I think he should be someone set up for near the end game, but not quite make it, especially because, like, I'll be surprised if Ferris gets to the end and doesn't win a jury vote. I think while we are seeing people talk about him as someone that they don't trust, I feel like it doesn't really translate to him being a bad player, and I feel like he's the type of person that would be respected in modern Australian Survivor. Though, I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't completely rule it out either. Like, Ferris is someone that, again, I do think he's here for the long term. I just don't know if he's here to win. Where, again, I do feel like his edit is just a bit inconsistent in the fact that while he is constantly shown, we're constantly shown him being varying ends of positivity. Again, there are points where he's shown to be a good player. There's points where he's shown to have bad reads in the game. And again, I do feel like the edit is actually kind of backing Kirby a bit more in terms of strategy energy in the game, despite that really shouldn't be the case in my mind. Where it is funny how like the edit is showing Ferris as like this untrustworthy player when he's been nothing but trustworthy to his allies. It's Kirby's the one that's actually betraying her allies left and right. Yet for some reason, Ferris is being painted as the untrustworthy one. Where, again, I think that is definitely a potential knock as well. But again, I do think Ferris is in it for a long haul. I just don't know if he's actually winning this season. So because that for me, he's here number 3. Now number 2, and for me this top 2 is pretty definitive at this point, where I feel like these top 2 have the most well-rounded edits of the bunch. I feel like these 2 are not even people that I think are playing the best games at this point. I actually think both of these people are playing faulty games to a degree. However, I think their edits are not showing them in that way. However, I think the person at number 2 is a little bit more inconsistent than the number 1 person. So at number 2, I'm going to go with Mark. And Mark is someone that has surprised me on this season. Obviously, I came into the season having very low expectations of Mark. I thought he was going to be called out as schemy early on, potentially be an early boot. But no, he's actually been a somewhat decent player. Now, I will say, I think for pre-swap, he was a good player. Post-swap, But I thought he was playing an early game, even though a bit too overt in him being in the middle. But again, the edit was always showing him as a very good player. We always got a lot of his perspective, where we saw a lot of his relationships. We saw his relationship with the middle-aged mafia. We saw his relationship with the Invisible Hand. We saw his relationship with the V's. With his relationship with the V's in particular, it seemed like it was one that was going to last long-term. And again, that led to the shock where Viola went out. And after, I think his game completely crumbles. Again, he tries to organize his vote against Caroline, despite him not even having the social capital to do so. And that really even burns him even more social capital. He since then has been on the bottom. And again, we see him being aloof in episode 11 with him not realizing the fact that there was this plot to blindside him, which is not good. That is definitely the biggest knock for me on Mark's edit at this point, considering I actually think his edit outside that has been pretty squeaky clean, which again, it shouldn't be, because I don't think he's been playing particularly well since the swap. Yet despite that, the edit has been portraying him as if he is. Like, the edit shows him as if he's in the right in most situations, again, until episode 11, which is the point where, again, I think the edit went down on him a little bit, but I still feel like as a whole, Mark is still being shown as a major character on this season. And there was a point where I was a bit worried that he was too major of a character, though I do think the likes of Ferris and Kirby have overtaken his spotlight in the edit. So again, I do think Mark is actually in a pretty decent spot edit-wise to win this season. But again, there is definitely that red flag of episode 11, how that was portrayed. But I mean, to be fair, there's also kind of a red flag with the top person as well. Again, like, really no one on this season has a perfect edit. And that's something that I do think is definitely refreshing from Australian Survivor, which, I mean, to be fair, Heroes vs. Villains had a similar thing. But really, in the span of like Champions Contenders 2 to Blood vs. Water, it felt like the Australian Survivor winner edit was just so predictable. And again, this at least adds a bit more unpredictability, where again, I'm a bit more unsure who's going to win, but I still feel like Mark has one of the more consistent edits on the board, and that's why he's here number 2. Now number 1, and again, the person who I think is the most likely to win this season of Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels is Valeria. And again, it's not really that close. I mean, Valeria is someone that I do think has pretty much everything you would want from an Australian Survivor winner edit. I feel like Valeria's edit actually might be a bit too perfect, which is probably the thing that I'm a bit more hesitant on. I mean, even the next time on, we even got this shot of JLP saying Soul Survivor, and it's a shot of Valeria, which just feels so on the nose. But I wouldn't put it past Australian Survivor, which is just in general very on the nose. But again, I do think edit-wise, Valeria is just, again, this constant presence on this season. We constantly hear her thoughts on what's going on in the game, where, I mean, to be fair, I think her first week was a bit quieter than I was expecting. She got a big premiere episode. After that, she was a bit quiet, which left me a bit unsure on where exactly her edit was going. But ever since then, again, she's just been someone that we've heard from at least once per episode, and we hear a lot about her relationships in the game. We see her connections to the likes of Mark and Kirby, and we see her rivalry with Caroline, which again, I do think is going to be a major storyline coming through Merge, which I 100% expect Valeria to win that battle. Like, I do think Valeria is very much primed for a deep run on this season. Her edit does very much feel kind of Pia-y to me. Of, again, she's not the major character of this season. There definitely are bigger characters on this season. Again, the likes of Kirby, Ferris, Mark, all have much bigger edits than her, but she's still a constant presence. She still is being shown in a strategic light. We're seeing her as if she's a good player, even though, again, I definitely question how she's playing the game, where it does feel like she's playing the game a bit emotionally and does have some not great reads at points. She also does seem to be dismissive of people. Again, the way she treats Ferris, the way she treats Kelly is not good from a gameplay perspective. But again, the show isn't showing it. as that. The show is not showing her as wrong in her reads, it's showing her as right, even though I think she is wrong on her read of Ferris, at least. So again, the edit is backing her up. She's constantly on the show. She is someone that, again, we know a lot of what she's thinking in the game. Again, there really is very little negative to be had here, outside the fact that, again, it just feels a bit too perfect for an Australian Survivor winner edit. But again, it does very much fit in line with a lot of the other Australian Survivor winner edits. Outside of, again, the fact that I do think these moments of her like getting into a fight with Ferris at Tribal is not a great look. But again, I'm just unsure if that's the way the edit is trying to make us see that. So again, I definitely have qualms with how Valeria is actually playing the game. But I do think from an edit perspective, I do think her edit is the most spotless of the bunch, where I really feel like she ticks off all the boxes. And the only potential red flags are things that are really just up for interpretation. To where, again, I don't really get a good sense of what the edit is trying to make us feel during certain scenes like that. To where, again, I do feel like Valeria is the very clear number one contender here. She does feel like a person that is getting the prototypical Australian Survivor winner edit. But again, we literally just came from Liz winning the show in what was a bit of an abnormal edit. I mean, by the end, it became pretty standard. But for the first half of the season, her edit was not really what you would look at as a prototypical winner edit, to where, again, maybe we're in for the same thing on this season. But again, if I were to put my faith in a single person winning this season, that person would be Valeria at this point. So again, she ends up being the number one contender on the list. With that, that is my mid-season power ranking for Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels. Obviously, at the end of the season, I'll be back with a pretty long season review, I'm sure. And then obviously a player ranking following that, as I do with every other English language season of Survivor. And again, if you want to follow my thoughts on this season as it's going along, you follow me at twitch.tv/review, where I stream every Wednesday and Sunday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern time, so you can hear me talk about all the shows that are going on during that. Now, obviously, beyond that, we have Survivor 46 coming up very soon, The Amazing Race, BB Can, all those being shows I'm going to do videos on moving forward. Also, the challenge Battle for a New Champion finishes on the day that this video will come out, which I will be doing a review of that straight up. It will probably come out a little bit later, just due to the fact that, again, I'll also be releasing my final parts of my Big Brother player ranking coming up, to where for me that takes the priority over to the challenge review, but again, it'll come out eventually. Also, obviously, be doing a review of the Trader Season 2, which will be concluding in a few weeks, so stay tuned for a review of that as well. And just in general, stay tuned for more of the standard content you can expect from the channel. I have a lot of rankings coming up. I have a lot of who would I vote for videos, so stay tuned for all those things. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.